The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 44 Madness, Genius, and the Thin Line between Welcome to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Today, we step onto one of the most dangerous and illuminating edges of the human condition, the thin line between madness and genius. For centuries, our culture has wrestled with this paradox. We revere the visionary who reshapes the world, yet we fear the instability that so often shadows their brilliance. From Van Gogh's spiraling despair to Tesla's isolated obsessions, from prophets dismissed as delusional to scientists who glimpsed truths no one else could see, the razor's edge between insight and breakdown has always been with us. This episode belongs to the arc edge states, thresholds, extremes, and the human limit. Here we explore where inspiration becomes obsession, where revelation blurs into rupture, and how the same fire that fuels transformation can also consume. As always, this isn't about sterile theory, it's about lived experience, about recognizing the thresholds inside ourselves. Because all of us, in some way, walk that fine edge between vision and fracture. So, let's begin the razor's edge of the mind. Where does brilliance end and breakdown begin? The human mind has always walked a razor's edge between insight and instability. History remembers visionaries who transformed the world, and also those whose visions burned them alive. From Van Gogh cutting his ear to Tesla dying alone in a hotel, to prophets dismissed as mad until their words reshaped culture, the line between genius and madness is never stable. Society both fears and reveres those who think differently. We call them eccentric, inspired, unhinged, or prophetic, depending on what we need from them. What unites them is that they stand on thresholds the rest of us rarely approach, where identity cracks, intensity surges, and a new order of perception threatens to emerge. Themes and attributes madness and genius are mirrors of the same fire. Intensity, ideas that burn so brightly they cannot be dimmed. Fracture, the psyche splitting under pressure, revealing new pathways or tearing apart. Vision, seeing what others miss, whether as insight or delusion. Obsession, the drive to pursue a single idea beyond reason. Alienation, the cost of standing apart where belonging is lost. When society encounters these attributes, it struggles to know whether to crown them or confine them. At one extreme, the genius celebrated, funded, remembered. At the other, the madman institutionalized, medicated, forgotten. But sometimes they are the same person, just seen from two different angles. Personal reflection. When I was a teenager, I lived somewhere on this edge myself, though not in dramatic extremes. From 16 onwards, I buried myself in study. While friends went to nightclubs, I spent weekends working shifts and evenings devouring science and engineering. I loved it. I wasn't withdrawing out of depression, I was genuinely fascinated. Yet this difference began to set me apart. Friends would laugh that I was too serious. I felt guilty for saying no to their invitations, guilty even when I did go out but didn't enjoy it. That period showed me how quickly society interprets difference. My hermit-like focus could have been read as antisocial, obsessive, or even unhealthy. In truth, it was the ground where I discovered my rhythm. Looking back, I realize I was already encountering that razor's edge. What feels like passion and vision to one person can look like madness to another. 4. Psychological insight psychology has long debated the overlap between genius and madness. Aristotle famously noted that no great mind has ever existed without a touch of madness. In antiquity, inspiration was seen as divine possession, the muses granting vision, even if it unmoored the thinker. Modern psychiatry reframes these traits as symptoms: hypomania, obsessive rumination, and schizotypy. Yet research by K. Redfield Jameson in Touch with Fire found striking links between bipolar disorder and creativity, particularly in poets, artists, and musicians. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described flow as an ecstatic absorption that can look, from the outside, like mania, hours disappearing in a single idea, but where mania consumes, flow renews. The boundary is fine, sometimes invisible until crossed. I saw a softer version of this in myself. The obsessive drive to finish assignments immediately, the joy of immersion, the neglect of the social sphere, all of it straddled the line. Was it brilliance or avoidance? Discipline or disconnection? The truth is it was both. The insight is that the razor's edge is not reserved for geniuses or outcasts. It is present in all of us, wherever passion tips into compulsion or vision tips into fracture. Embodiment prompt or practice. Think of a time when your focus, creativity, or drive was labeled as too much by others. Write down the words they used, then ask yourself, what did that same intensity give you? What insight or skill grew from it? Integration moment. The razor's edge of the mind is not simply a pathology or a gift. It is both, depending on how we hold it. Genius burns, madness breaks. But both reveal something essential about human possibility, that the mind was never meant to be confined to safety alone. Seed to plant. When your intensity scares you, pause and reframe it. Ask, is this fire trying to destroy me or transform me? The difference lies less in the flame itself and more in whether we find ways to channel it. Madness as stigma, madness as revelation madness is never neutral. In one society, it is diagnosed, medicated, and hidden. In another, it is revered as a sign of calling. Some cultures lock their visionaries away in hospitals, others send them to the mountains to return as shamans. The same altered perception that earns someone pity or punishment in one context can earn them power and purpose in another. Themes and attributes. To understand madness, we need to see it as both a mirror and a mask. Stigma. Western psychiatry often defines madness as a disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or psychosis conditions to be managed or subdued. The mad person becomes a patient, stripped of authority. Revelation. In other contexts, visions and altered states are woven into initiation. The voices or images are not signs of sickness, but signs that the person must mediate between worlds. Social construction. Michel Foucault argued that madness is not just medical but political, a category that societies use to police the boundaries of acceptable thought. What one century calls madness, another might call prophecy. Attributes expanded. Stigma isolates, brands and silences. Sanctity transforms suffering into authority. Distortion means reality is bent, whether as a breakdown or as a metaphor. Calling reframes pain as initiation. Transformation shows that altered states can destroy or rebuild identity, depending on context. Personal reflection. When I was 16 to 19, I lived a kind of double life. On the surface, I was a focused student, burying myself in engineering studies, disciplined enough to finish assignments almost as soon as they were given. I loved learning, and science lit me up. But while my peers were out drinking or shouting over music in clubs, I was at home, often alone, reading or working. Some of them saw me as the odd one out. A few even said I was too serious or boring for not wanting the same things. At the time, I carried guilt for withdrawing. Their judgment didn't frame me as mad in a clinical sense, but the undertone was the same. I was deviating from the script of normal youth. Looking back, I see how easy it is for society to label difference, to stigmatize withdrawal as antisocial or deep focus as unhealthy. And yet, in that same period, I was cultivating something essential. What was seen as isolation was also the seedbed of insight. Had I lived in a different time or culture, my habits might have been reframed, not as oddness to be fixed, but as apprenticeship to a calling. Psychological insight. The way madness is framed has less to do with symptoms than with culture. Foucault's history of madness revealed how institutions in Europe shifted madness from being seen as part of the cosmic order to being confined as a disease. The madman was once a figure on the edge of wisdom, even feared as closer to divine or demonic knowledge. By the modern era, he became a patient to be silenced. Anthropology shows another angle. In many indigenous traditions, what psychiatry would call psychosis is seen as shamanic initiation. Anthropologist Joan Halifax documented cases where visions and breakdowns marked the beginning of a healer's path. Psychology complicates it further. Carl Jung noted his own confrontation with the unconscious, a period of intense visions and dialogues that could easily have been labeled psychosis. Yet from this came his deepest theories. For Jung, madness was also revelation, provided the psyche could integrate it. My years of self-imposed isolation could have been cast as unhealthy withdrawal. At times, I worried that something was wrong with me for preferring books to clubs. But later I saw those same traits as the foundation for the work I now do. The same solitude that seemed stigmatized as avoidance was also the soil for vision. The insight is this: madness is a lens, and how it's named depends on who is holding it. Pathology and prophecy are sometimes the same experience, refracted through cultural values. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Choose one moment in your life where you felt judged for being different. Write it down. Then reframe it. If you were living in another culture, how might this difference have been seen as a gift, not a flaw? Integration moment madness cannot be cleanly separated into sickness or gift. It is always both a distortion and a doorway. When we reduce it to stigma, we silence voices that may carry truth. When we romanticize it as revelation, we risk overlooking suffering that needs care. The work is to hold both. Seed to plant this week when you encounter someone who unsettles you, eccentric, obsessive, intense. Pause before labeling them. Ask yourself, what might be hidden in their difference that society has no language for yet? Genius as gift, genius as burden. We love to celebrate genius, the painter who creates something eternal, the scientist who unlocks the secrets of nature, the innovator who changes the world. Yet behind every triumph is a cost often unseen: loneliness, exhaustion, obsession, even collapse. Genius can illuminate, but it can also isolate. The same flame that lights the way for others can burn the one carrying it. The two faces of genius attributes: brilliance, obsession, solitude, sacrifice, and fragility. Themes: the psychology of creativity, the double edged nature of insight, and the toll genius often exacts on the individual. Themes and attributes: brilliance shines outward, drawing others in awe, yet those who carry it often feel the weight of being different. Obsession drives creation, but can consume health, relationships, and balance. Solitude is both the cradle of vision and the cost of pursuing what few understand. Sacrifice appears again and again. Time, relationships, and even sanity are left behind in pursuit of an idea. Fragility reminds us that behind the myth of genius is a human body and psyche that can break under the very pressure that fuels brilliance. To hold genius is to walk between creation and collapse. Society praises the product but often ignores the price. Personal reflection. In my own life, I've glimpsed this dynamic in smaller but meaningful ways. At 16, I was known as the one who always finished assignments the same day they were given. To teachers, it looked like discipline and ability. To me, it felt like a compulsion. I had to finish, because the thought of leaving work undone gnawed at me. Friends didn't understand. While they left work until the last minute, I stayed in, quietly grinding away. The admiration I got for being clever carried its shadow, guilt for missing out on social life, and unease that my energy was locked into a narrow focus. That same focus gave me good grades and opportunities, but it also left me lonely. Looking back, I see the seed of the same paradox that defines so many lives of so-called geniuses. The gift and the burden are never separate. What gives you wings also exacts its price. Psychological insight psychology has long studied the connection between genius and suffering. Take Vincent van Gogh. His paintings revolutionized art, yet his life was marked by breakdowns, alienation, and despair. His brilliance gave the world color and form we still marvel at today, but it also consumed him. Nikola Tesla is another, a visionary whose imagination birthed technologies that power our modern world, but his obsessions left him isolated, impoverished, and often dismissed in his lifetime. Modern research explores this paradox. K. Redfield Jameson notes that traits linked to creativity, openness, heightened sensitivity, and divergent thinking are also associated with vulnerability to mood disorders. Genius is not just the gift of thinking differently, but the burden of feeling differently, often more intensely than others. Even in more everyday forms, this paradox emerges. Studies of students in gifted education show higher rates of anxiety, perfectionism, and social isolation. The very qualities that allow someone to excel can also leave them feeling like outsiders. I resonate with this research. My obsessive study habits as a teen were never labeled as brilliance until later in life, when I was diagnosed at 36 with autism, ADHD, and bipolar type 2 comorbidities. But the dynamic was there. What was applauded in school was also what left me feeling isolated. The insight is that genius is not simply brilliance, it is intensity, and intensity always cuts both ways. Embodiment, prompt, or practice. Think of one strength you've been praised for in life, perhaps discipline, creativity, empathy, or intelligence. Write down the ways it has helped you. Then write down the costs it has incurred. Notice how every gift leaves a shadow. Integration moment. To call someone a genius without recognizing their burden is to erase half their humanity. Creativity does not bloom in a vacuum. It grows through sacrifice, through sleepless nights, through the loneliness of walking paths few others understand. Genius is both a gift and a burden, and to honor it fully, we must name both. Seed to plant. Next time you admire someone's brilliance, pause and ask yourself, what might it be costing them to carry that gift? And when you notice your intensity, don't just ask how it serves others, ask how it shapes, strains, or isolates you. Genius is not what we have, it is what we hold and what it holds of us. The thin line, where they meet. There is a place where genius and madness blur so completely that it's impossible to know where one ends and the other begins. It's the moment when inspiration races so fast it spills into mania, when flow feels indistinguishable from frenzy, when the same fire that fuels breakthrough threatens to consume the person holding it. Fire that warms, fire that burns themes and attributes flow and mania. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described flow as a state of effortless absorption, when time dissolves and the self vanishes into the act. Yet in its extreme, flow shades into mania, restless energy, ideas exploding faster than they can be contained. Psychosis and creativity, where one person sees chaos, another sees connection. Psychosis can fracture meaning, but within it may appear visions, metaphors, or images that resemble the wild originality of art and myth. Breakthrough and burnout. Many innovators ride cycles of intensity followed by collapse. Breakthrough arrives in the fever of sleepless nights, and burnout follows when the body cannot carry the mind's relentless pace. Paradox, this thin line is not clean. It is messy, volatile, dangerous, and transformative. To live near it is to feel constantly at the edge of discovery and destruction. Personal reflection. I've had glimpses of this edge in my own life. During my late teens, when studying became my obsession, I sometimes experienced what felt like a flow turning manic. Hours passed like minutes, but when I stepped back, my body was exhausted. Friends saw the results. Work finished early, knowledge that impressed teachers. But inside, I often felt jittery, restless, like my brain was running faster than I could live. I remember once completing an entire coursework project in a single night. It wasn't discipline, it was compulsion. At first, it felt euphoric, as though the ideas were carrying me. By morning, I felt wrecked, unable to think clearly for days. That oscillation between brilliance and collapse showed me how close the line can be and how easy it is to slip. Psychological insight. The mad genius archetype is not a romantic myth, but a recurring reality. Research by Nancy Andreessen and Kay Redfield Jamieson found unusually high rates of bipolar spectrum traits among creative populations, artists, writers, and scientists. Mania fuels productivity and originality, but it is rarely sustainable. Flow, too, has its shadow. While described as positive, it can also become addictive. Studies on extreme athletes and coders show that prolonged flow states can lead to neglect of basic needs, disrupted sleep, and eventual burnout. What begins as immersion can turn to imbalance. Psychosis has also been re examined through this lens. Some psychologists argue that what we call psychosis may sometimes reflect the brain's overgeneration of meaning. Too many connections, too many associations. Where most filter them out, the psychotic mind drowns in them. Yet those same associations often mirror the leaps artists and visionaries make when forging something original. I find this both fascinating and sobering. My obsessive focus on study may never have crossed into clinical mania, but it showed me how easily intensity tips into unsustainable extremes. Genius and madness, I realize, are not different categories. They are points along the same spectrum of intensity. The danger is not in touching the edge, but in living there too long without grounding. Embodiment prompt or practice. This week, experiment with balance at your edge. Notice an activity that puts you in flow, writing, training, work, creativity. Pay attention to your body's signals, fatigue, hunger, and agitation. When you feel yourself crossing into compulsion, pause, breathe, and step back. Ask yourself, am I being carried by inspiration or am I being consumed by it? Integration moment. The thin line between madness and genius is not a straight boundary but a shifting tide. It teaches us that intensity is both dangerous and divine, that creation and collapse are neighbours. To walk this line is to court both illumination and fire. Seed to plant next time you find yourself at the edge of obsession, whisper to yourself, this fire can warm, but it can also burn. Genius is not only about lighting the world, it is also about learning when to step back from the flame. The fire at the edge, madness and genius are not enemies, they are flames of the same fire. One illuminates, the other consumes, yet both remind us that to feel deeply and think differently is to risk being undone. The mind teaches us that brilliance is never free of burden, and breakdown is never free of meaning. A vision, a fracture, an obsession, a collapse, each is a threshold asking, will you let this fire destroy you or transform you? At the edges of thought, we don't just find instability, we find a possibility. We discover that creation and chaos, inspiration and ruin, are not walls but doorways into deeper truth. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay human, stay awake, and remember, every edge is both dangerous and divine. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 the simulated self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 the spell of the mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 conscious seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 the myth of sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 the algorithmic mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 the noise of knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within Traces, Food, Frequency, and the Forgotten Intelligence of the Body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.